If you will, please stand up. I will walk with the Lord in the light of His word. What a glory He sheds on our way. Running through His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey. In fellowship sweet, we will sit at His feet, or will walk by His side in the way. What He says we will do, where He sends we will go. Never fear, only trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus, but to trust and obey.
All right, y'all can go ahead and be turned into 1 Corinthians 6. And as you're turning there, I'll go ahead and say, be looking at your highlights to make sure you're keeping up with the announcements. With regard to the youth group, I've been posting a lot about this, just to make sure everybody's aware. Tonight is the deadline for sign-ups for exposure. So if you're in the youth group or a parent in the youth group and you want to go, you need to comment on the Facebook post that I've been making, because I'll be making that sign-up sheet and then signing everybody up in the next couple days, and we'll be sending that information to Huntsville. So today's the last day, so if you're not on the list by tonight, you just missed the cutout date for that. So we have that coming up, so that deadline's got to be met. So 1 Corinthians 6, and look at we'll start in verse 19. And as you're turning there, I'll tell you a little story. There was a young girl, and she would come to class every day. And what she did at the beginning of the school year was she took a little piece of paper, and as she walked in the classroom, she put on her little piece of paper a big V on the piece of paper, and she stuck it up on the doorpost in their classroom. And one of her classmates said, "What's that on the door? What's that about?" And she said to him, "You'll see eventually, you'll see eventually." And so every day she would come in and kind of tap that little piece of paper on the top of the door. Every day she'd tap the piece of paper on the top of the door. Every day she'd come in and tap the piece of paper on the end of the door. So she would do that for 4 years when she was in high school, whatever classroom she was in. And she did it every single day. And everybody would ask her what it's about. She said, "You'll see eventually." So it comes down to the end of the school year. And lo and behold, she is at the very top of her class. And she gets to give the valedictorian speech at graduation. She has the highest GPA. And she's at the very top of her class. She's the best student in the entire student body of her graduating class. And so all of her friends and even some of her teachers finally come up to her and said, "Oh, I see what the V was about." And she said, "Yeah, every day I wanted to make sure that I remembered what I was here for. Every day I wanted to make sure what I was working for. I wanted to make sure and remember and see the goal that I was working for. When I was at Fried Hardeman in my undergraduate studies, one of my favorite professors, who I had for 4 of my 6 semesters of Greek, would basically say this every day when we came to class. He said, this is a means to an end when we were studying the Greek New Testament. And he said, Greek is a means to an end. And he said, I want you to remember the goal. He would say that almost every day. I even have it written, I think, in one of my Bibles somewhere. Yeah, it's right here. Remember the goal, right in the cover. He said, remember the goal. Remember the goal. Remember the goal. And his whole point was, okay, this is really hard, and no one really enjoys the process when you learn another language or a third language or whatever. But he said, remember the goal. And obviously the goal was learning to read the New Testament in its original linguistic context. And so I took 4 semesters with him and 2 semesters with another teacher, and throughout that whole time of my college career, I had that little mantra in my head, remember the goal, because it was drilled into my brain as a freshman. And I remember him saying when I was a freshman that one day you'll be reading the New Testament devotionally. One day you'll be reading it every day. And I thought he was kidding. I thought he was nuts. I thought he was out of his mind. But the lesson really stuck with me. It's something that I learned to do every day. But it's because he drilled this point in, remember the goal, remember the goal, remember the goal, remember the goal. Now, the reason why I bring us to 1 Corinthians 6 is Paul says something very interesting that I want us to think about. He asks a rhetorical question here, and it would indicate that the answer to his rhetorical question is yes. He says, don't you know, not verse 19, I'm sorry. There is a rhetorical question there in verse 19, and the answer to that rhetorical question is yes. 1 Corinthians 9. Go to 1 Corinthians 9. I was looking at the wrong verse. My apologies. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 24. He asks, again, he does ask a rhetorical question here, that the answer to the question is yes. He says, don't you know that all those who run, they run, but only one receives the prize? So run in this way that you might obtain. He says, everyone competes, and everyone practices self-control. And they do this so that they would receive a perishable crown. Now, he uses a particular word there that they're talking about, the crown that you put on someone's head that's like a wreath. So imagine what you would do from the time that you're a child. You would train every day to practice, to train in these, to compete in these games. And you would train, and you would train, and you would train, and whoever won the games trained their entire life just so that they could receive this little thing, like this crown made of twigs or something that you just kind of weave together on your head. And you spend all of that time and all of that effort and all of those resources to submit your body to athletic rigor so that you can receive this tiny little thing. So he says that they do this for a perishable crown, for this little thing. But we compete for an imperishable crown. Therefore, I run not as aimlessly, and I box not as though I'm boxing or beating the air, but I put my body under control, or I beat my body, and I put it under control. I make it my slave, so that after preaching to others, I might not be disqualified. What's he saying? He's saying every morning, every day, he would wake up and he would say, I'm remembering the goal. Every day he would wake up and he says, there's a certain thing that I'm competing here for. There's a certain thing here that I'm fighting for. There's a certain thing here that I'm running for. And I fear the reason why I fail so often in my life is because that goal is absent from my realm of thinking. So if I came home and I put a sign on my door, it's interesting that we say that because that's in the law. That's in Deuteronomy 6. They'd say, put the law on your door, write it on your face, write it on the frontals of your forehead. So that was a real thing for them. But we're saying this metaphorically speaking. If I were to put a sign on my door that says, this is what I'm living my life for, and I looked at that sign every day and I said, I remember the goal, how would that influence my life? How would that affect my life? How would that affect the way that I view evangelism? Or how would that affect the way I view giving? Or how would that affect the way that I treat authority? It would affect every aspect of my life because I will not allow myself to take my eyes off of my purpose, my goal, my aim, the reason for why I'm here. So there's an aspect of just this magnificent obsession over being spiritually minded that we all have the opportunity to embrace, that we all have the responsibility to embrace. Here Paul says, I beat my body. I buffet my body. Think about the self-control that takes. Think about the pain that he would have endured, the pain that at least denotes, that you can think of when you say someone's hitting themselves every single day, beating themselves every single day to bring their body under submission. How are we doing with that? How are we doing with that? With the decision and the commitment, with the reminder of what we live this life for, of what we're here on this earth to do. So I would encourage all of us to remember the goal. That was just a saying that my professor, Doug Burleson, had, and it stuck with me, and I thought that I would share it with you all, and hopefully that it will stick with you as well. So as we offer the invitation this evening, there may be people who are struggling with that. There may be someone who's falling short of that. There may be someone who needs to obey the gospel, to come home to Christ. Whatever you may need, whatever need you may have, you have leaders and ministers here who care for you and will attend to you. We offer the invitation now as together we stand and sing.
I have decided to follow